The message came at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing a $47 million infrastructure proposal when my phone lit up on the corner of my desk. I didn't reach for it immediately. I had learned over the years that messages from my father rarely required urgent attention. They were rarely kind. And they were almost never about me, not in any way that mattered. When I finally picked up the phone, I read it twice. Birthday dinner Saturday. Adults only. Don't come. Dad. 9 words. No punctuation on the last sentence except a period, which somehow made it worse. Not a question. Not an apology. A directive. Clean and final, the way he had always communicated with me, as though my presence in his life was a logistical problem he was continuously solving. I set the phone face down on the desk and looked out the window at the city below. 31 floors up, the streets looked orderly from here. Everything small and manageable. I had learned to love that view for exactly that reason. My assistant Priya knocked twice and leaned through the doorway. The governor's office confirmed for Saturday. 7:30 private room at Marcello's. They're sending a security detail advance team this afternoon. I nodded. Tell them that works perfectly. She smiled and disappeared. I turned back to the infrastructure proposal. At 12:15 my phone buzzed again. This time it was the family group chat. A thread I had muted 8 months ago but never left, because leaving would have required an explanation I didn't have the energy to give. My Aunt Linda had typed, honestly probably better this way. No offense, sweetheart, but Raymond's friends are very accomplished. You know how those dinners go. 3 people liked it. My cousin Derek added a thumbs up emoji. My mother, who had been divorced from my father for 11 years and still somehow participated in group chats about his birthday dinners, wrote, Linda's right. Maybe next year when things are more stable for you. I read that last line carefully. When things are more stable for you. I had $94 million in assets under my personal holding company. I had 3 government contracts totaling $31 million in active work. I had been named to Forbes' list of the top infrastructure innovators under 40 for the 2nd consecutive year. I had a standing dinner reservation with the sitting governor of the state, who had been my mentor since I was 26 years old and who, last Christmas, had asked me to serve as an informal economic advisor on his infrastructure task force. Things were stable. Things had been stable for quite some time. But my family did not know that. And I had chosen deliberately and strategically to keep it that way, not out of shame and not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because I had watched what happened when people with power discovered that someone they'd dismissed had become worth paying attention to. The warmth was artificial. The interest was transactional. And I had no interest in being loved conditionally by people who had spent 15 years practicing the unconditional version of contempt. I typed 2 letters into the group chat. Then I put the phone back on the desk and returned to the proposal. Let me tell you what they actually knew about me. They knew I had left my hometown at 22 with a business degree from a state university they considered unremarkable. They knew I had spent 3 years working for a mid-size construction consulting firm in the city, a job my father referred to as the drafting thing at every family gathering until I stopped correcting him. They knew I had left that firm to start something on my own, which my Aunt Linda had once described at Thanksgiving as very brave considering. They did not know that something on my own was Caldwell Infrastructure Partners, a firm I had incorporated at 26 with 2 partners and grown, over 9 years, into a company that employed 340 people and held active contracts with 4 federal agencies and 7 state governments. They did not know about the contracts. They did not know about the employees. They did not know about the Forbes recognition, the governor's task force, or the fact that the federal building currently under renovation 3 blocks from my father's house, the one he complained about every time he drove past it, was a Caldwell project. They knew what I had shown them, which was nothing. A quiet apartment in the city. Modest clothes when I visited. A vague answer whenever someone asked what I was working on. I had been careful. Deliberately, patiently, strategically careful. My father had 3 children. My older brother, Marcus, was a commercial real estate broker who made a comfortable living and wore it loudly. New car every 2 years, season tickets, a house in the right neighborhood. He was my father's obvious pride. They golfed together. They talked about markets and deals. They had a language built from mutual recognition. My younger sister, Becca, was a pediatric nurse, warm and beloved and exactly the kind of daughter a man introduces with uncomplicated pride. She had a husband, 2 kids, and a life that photographed beautifully. And then there was me. I was the middle one. The quiet one. The one who left and never quite explained herself. The one who didn't golf and didn't have a husband and didn't have a house that required a mortgage conversation. The one whose professional life existed entirely in a language my father had never tried to learn. When I was 24 at a Christmas dinner, my father had looked at me across the table and said, "I just worry you're not building anything real." He hadn't meant to be cruel. That was almost the hardest part. He had meant to express concern. But what it told me was that his definition of real had never included room for what I was building, and that no amount of explaining was going to change that. Not words, anyway. So I stopped explaining. I started building. And I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. The invitation from Governor Harlan Merritt had come 6 weeks earlier. His chief of staff, a precise and efficient woman named Caroline Foss, had called my direct line on a Thursday afternoon. The governor would like to host a small working dinner to discuss the state's 10-year infrastructure framework. He's thinking Marcello's private room, a handful of senators and agency heads. He specifically wants you there. He said, and I'm quoting him, "She's the only person in the room who's actually built something." I had laughed at that. Tell him Saturday the 15th works. Perfect. He'll be pleased. I had noted the date on my calendar and thought nothing more of it. I did not know at that moment that my father would choose Saturday the 15th for his birthday dinner. I did not know he would choose Marcello's, his favorite restaurant for 20 years, the place where he had celebrated every milestone that mattered to him. I did not engineer the collision. I want to be precise about that. But I also did not cancel. When I put the 2 calendar entries side by side and understood what was about to happen, I considered my options clearly and methodically. I could move my dinner. Caroline had said the governor was flexible. I could request a different restaurant. Caroline would have accommodated that without question. I did neither. Not because I wanted confrontation. I had never wanted confrontation. 15 years of strategic silence should testify to that. But I had also spent 15 years being quietly, patiently erased from my own family's story, and there was a part of me, the part that had built a $94 million company from a spare bedroom and 2 partners and a belief that real was whatever you were willing to work for, that was simply, finally, tired of making itself small to accommodate people who had never once asked how it was growing. I confirmed my reservation at Marcello's for 7:30 p.m. I selected a dress I had been saving for exactly the kind of evening that deserved it. And on Saturday morning, when the group chat lit up with photos of my father's family gathering, my brother's kids in matching outfits, Aunt Linda in her good pearls, my mother wishing Raymond the most wonderful birthday from a woman who had not spoken to him civilly in a decade, I read every message without responding and went to the gym. The private dining room at Marcello's was everything the main floor was not. Where the main floor had noise and warmth and the comfortable chaos of a restaurant that had been a city institution for 40 years, the private room was quiet and deliberate. Dark wood paneling. A single long table set for 9. Flowers that someone had chosen carefully. The kind of lighting that made everyone in the room look like they were being photographed for something important. Governor Merritt arrived at 7:22 ahead of schedule, which was characteristic. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with the particular ease of someone who had spent decades being the most powerful person in most rooms and had stopped needing to perform it. He shook my hand with both of his. "Elena," he said. "You look like you just came from winning something." "Working on it," I said. He laughed and took his seat. The senators arrived in pairs. Thomas Aldridge, Infrastructure Committee, who had shepherded 2 of my firm's federal contracts through the approval process and treated me with the particular respect of someone who understood that relationships were long-term investments. Dana Krishnamurti, Finance Committee, who had once described Caldwell Infrastructure Partners in a floor speech as exactly the kind of private innovation that makes public projects work. A deputy director from the State Transportation Authority. The governor's senior policy advisor. By 7:35, the room was full and alive with the particular energy of people who worked at the intersection of money and policy and were, for one evening, allowed to simply eat well and think out loud. I was seated at the governor's right hand. This was not an accident. I had come to understand where he always put the person he wanted the table to pay attention to. At 7:41, I heard the noise from the main floor shift slightly. A brief murmur near the entrance. I didn't look up immediately. I was mid-sentence with Senator Aldridge about the Eastern Corridor project timeline, and the conversation was worth finishing. It was Governor Merritt who glanced toward the doorway first. "Looks like there's a bit of a situation out front," he said mildly with the calm of a man who had seen situations his entire career. I turned then. My father was standing at the threshold between the main floor and the private room's entrance hallway. He had not yet seen me. He was talking to the maitre d', a composed man named Henri who had worked at Marcello's for 19 years and who handled complications with the particular grace of someone who understood that the complications were always, at their core, about something other than reservations. My father's party was behind him. 8 people, maybe 9, gathered in the entrance with the slightly sheepish energy of a group that had expected a smooth arrival and was encountering friction. I could see Marcus in the back frowning at his phone. Aunt Linda peering around my father's shoulder. 2 of my father's golf friends in blazers they'd worn to look appropriate. My father was speaking in a low, firm voice. "I've had this reservation for 6 weeks. Private dining room, party of 9, Raymond Caldwell." Henri nodded with perfect patience. "Mr. Caldwell, I completely understand and I sincerely apologize for the confusion. The private room has been reserved for a state government function this evening. We have a wonderful table reserved for your party in our main dining room, one of our finest, right by the window. I specifically requested the private room." "Yes, sir, and again I do apologize. The reservation was unfortunately displaced by a prior booking at the governmental level, which takes precedence under our policy. Your party will be extremely well taken care of in." My father looked up. Perhaps it was the instinct of a man accustomed to scanning rooms for leverage. Perhaps it was the particular quality of the silence coming from behind Henri, a silence that had weight to it. Perhaps it was simply that Henry's eyes had, for just a fraction of a second, glanced in the direction of the private room. Whatever the reason, my father looked up. Past Henri. Through the doorway. And he saw me. I was looking directly at him. I did not look away. I did not perform surprise. I simply held his gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who had spent 9 years building something real and was for the first time allowing it to be visible. I watched his face move through several things in rapid succession. Confusion first. Genuine, structural confusion, the kind that comes when the image in front of you refuses to match the file your brain has stored. Then a deeper confusion as his eyes moved from my face to the table behind me, registering the governor, registering the senators, registering the quiet authority of the room. Then something I had never seen on my father's face before, not once in 37 years. He went very still. Henri, with the practiced diplomacy of a man who had navigated 40 years of complicated evenings, turned slightly and said in a voice just loud enough, "Mr. Caldwell, I should mention, the party in the private room has reserved the full room for the evening. However, if you wish, I can let Miss Caldwell know you're here." My father's mouth opened, closed. Marcus had moved to the front now, looking past his father. His frown had deepened into something else entirely. Aunt Linda had her hand over her mouth. Governor Merritt leaned slightly toward me and said quietly with genuine warmth, "Someone you know?" "Hi, father," I said. "It's his birthday today." The governor's eyebrows rose. Then, because Harlan Merritt had spent 30 years in public life and understood both symbolism and the weight of a moment, he stood up. All conversation at the table stopped. He walked to the doorway himself. He extended his hand to my father and said in the easy, unhurried tone of a man who knew exactly who he was, "Raymond Caldwell. Harlan Merritt. Happy birthday. Your daughter has been indispensable to this state for years. You must be extraordinarily proud." My father shook the governor's hand. He did it automatically, the way men of his generation shook hands when powerful people offered them, reflexively before the brain had finished processing what was happening. And then he stood there holding the governor's hand for a beat too long, because letting go meant having to respond, and he did not yet have the words. "Thank you," he finally said. The words came out smaller than I had ever heard from him. Governor Merritt smiled, released his hand and gestured toward the main floor. "Henri will take excellent care of you tonight. And please, have a bottle of whatever you'd like sent to your table. A birthday courtesy." He looked at Henri. "From us." Henri nodded smoothly. "Of course, Governor." And that was how my father and his party were guided, gently and graciously and with absolute finality, to a table in the main dining room. A good table. A window table. A table that, on any other night, my father would have been pleased with. Tonight it felt like the main floor. As it was. I watched them settle. Marcus sat down hard like something had gone out of his legs. Aunt Linda kept turning to look toward the private room's doorway, as though the information might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. My father sat with his back very straight and his eyes on the table in front of him, and he did not look in my direction for a long time. I turned back to the governor's table. Senator Krishnamurti raised her glass in a small, private toast in my direction. "You handled that beautifully," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything," I said. "Exactly," she said. The dinner went on for another 2 hours. We talked about the Eastern Corridor. We talked about the federal matching funds proposal. We talked about a bridge rehabilitation project in the northern counties that had been stalled for 4 years and needed the kind of push that only happened when the right people were in the same room at the same time. The governor told a story about a highway commissioner from 1987 that made Senator Aldridge laugh so hard he had to set down his wine glass. It was a good evening. It was the kind of evening I had worked toward for 9 years without being able to fully picture it, and now that it was happening it felt, oddly, like the quietest thing in the world. At 9:45, as the table began to wind down, my phone showed 3 texts. The first was from Marcus, "We need to talk." The second was from Aunt Linda, "Elena, I had no idea, sweetheart, you should have told us." The third was from my father. It was longer than 9 words this time. "I owe you an explanation. I know that's not enough. I'd like to talk when you have time. Not tonight. But when you're ready." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the white tablecloth and looked out at the city through the restaurant's tall windows. I did not reply. Not yet. Not that night. The group chat began moving at 7:12 a.m. I was already at my desk with coffee, reading through the follow-up notes from the governor's policy advisor when the notifications started stacking. I had unmuted the thread when I woke up, some instinct telling me that the morning after would be worth watching. Marcus had written a long paragraph that said in summary that he had done some research and was shocked and honestly a little hurt that I had never mentioned what I had built, and that he thought we deserved a family conversation. The subtext, which was not particularly was that he was embarrassed and was reframing his embarrassment as concern. Aunt Linda had sent 3 messages in a row, each more effusive than the last, each one working hard to overwrite what she had written the day before. "No offense, sweetheart." She had liked her own message about it being better this way. That was still there in the thread, sitting above her new warmth like a receipt she'd forgotten to shred. My cousin Derek, who had given the thumbs up, had said nothing. Smart enough to know there was no version of a thumbs up that looked good right now. My mother had written, "I always knew you had it in you, baby." I read that one slowly. "When things are more stable for you." That had been yesterday. "I always knew you had it in you." That was this morning. Same woman. 22 hours apart. I closed the thread without responding. Priya knocked at 8:30. The governor's office called. "He wants to formally invite you to co-chair the infrastructure task force. Permanent appointment, not advisory," he said, and again I'm quoting, "After last night it's the right time." I nodded. "Tell him yes." She smiled. "Already assumed." I drafted the acceptance. I had good people. That was, perhaps, the thing I was most proud of. Not the contracts, not the Forbes recognition, not the table at the governor's right hand. The people who had found their way to Caldwell Infrastructure Partners over 9 years because they believed in the work, and who had stayed because the work kept being worth believing in. My phone rang at 9:15. The number was my father's. I looked at it for the length of 4 rings. Then I answered. "Elena." His voice was different. Not smaller exactly, but quieter. The bluster that had always been his default register, the tone he used when he was performing confidence in front of people who might question it, was gone. What was left sounded, for the first time in my adult memory, like a man rather than a posture. "Dad." Pause. "I've been sitting here since 6 this morning trying to figure out what to say." "You don't have to say anything today," I told him, and I meant it. This was not a conversation I needed him to rush. "I do, though." Another pause. Longer. "I didn't know. And I should have known, not because you should have told me, but because I should have asked. For years I should have asked. And I didn't. Because I assumed." His voice went tighter. "I assumed you were struggling, and if I'm honest, I think I was comfortable with that assumption. It made sense of things for me. And that's not something I'm proud of. I let the silence sit. The governor shook my hand, he said, and there was something almost wondering in it. He said you'd been indispensable to the state. Do you know what that felt like? Standing there hearing that about my own daughter from a man like that, in a room I didn't know you belonged to. I imagine it was disorienting, I said carefully. It was the most ashamed I've ever been. He wasn't performing now. The words came out flat and undecorated, the way true things do when someone stops trying to manage how they land. Not of you, of myself, of what I've been choosing to see. I looked out the window at the city. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, he said. I'm not asking for anything today. I needed you to know that I understand something now that I didn't understand before. About you. About what real looks like. I thought about the Christmas dinner when I was 24. I just worry you're not building anything real. I had never forgotten those words. They had lived in the wall of my office for 9 years, not as a wound exactly but as a compass. A reminder of the distance between what someone assumed and what was actually being constructed just outside their line of sight. I appreciate that, Dad, I said. And I meant it. Not as absolution. Not as a clean slate. But as a beginning if he was willing to do the actual work of one. Happy birthday, I said. A long pause. Thank you, Elena. 6 weeks later, I co-chaired my first session of the governor's infrastructure task force. My father attended the public announcement event, which was covered by 3 local news outlets and 1 national infrastructure trade publication. He stood in the back of the room and he did not network and he did not try to position himself near the governor or the senators. He just stood there and watched. Afterward, in the parking lot, he found me before I reached my car. Can I take you to dinner? He asked. Not Marcello's. I looked at him for a moment. The honest version of him that had appeared on the phone 6 weeks ago was still there, a little uncertain, standing in a parking lot without the armor of assumption. Next week, I said. I'll have Priya find a time. He nodded. He started to say something else, then stopped. Then, the federal building on Garfield Street. The renovation. Yes. That's yours. That's ours, I said. 340 people. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. I drive past it every day. I've been complaining about the construction noise for 2 years. I know, I said. I heard. Something moved across his face. Guilt, maybe, or the particular ache of a joke that lands a few years too late. I did not rescue him from it. It was his to sit with, and sitting with it was how real change began. But I did say as I reached my car, the noise is almost done. It'll be finished by spring. He looked up. It's going to be a good building, I said. Come see it when it opens. He said he would. I drove back to the office 31 floors above the city and I looked out at the skyline and I thought about what my father had said. About what real looks like. Real looked like 340 people who showed up every morning and built things that lasted. Real looked like a governor's task force and a dinner table and 2 senators who knew your name because of what you had done, not who you were related to. Real looked like 9 years of quiet, patient, deliberate construction. Not for the moment of revelation, not for the look on anyone's face when they finally understood, but for the work itself, because the work was worth doing and it did not require an audience to be true. Real had always looked like that. I just hadn't needed anyone else to see it. Until now I found I didn't mind that they could.